Hello there, my friend. My name is Renee, and the true crime community has gone too far. Now, I love true crime. I think true crime is cool as hell. However, once it gets to the point where it's romanticizing serial killers and mass shooters, it becomes a bit of an issue. But that's been talked about plenty on YouTube. I just want to take the piss out of it. So, I opened up my old Wattpad account from 2013, and I searched up just some common serial killer names and buzzwords that just would have something to do with the true crime community and fanfiction. When I searched up the word Columbine, I got this one fanfiction by Columbine_girl titled Daddy's Little Girl, and I was naturally intrigued. So I suffered through the entire thing, all 13 chapters, and I'm gonna sum it up. So chapter 1 actually starts off quite vague. I think it's meant to be all mysterious and then you find out what's going on, but really it's just confusing. But it starts off with some kind of school shooting going on. And Eric, one of the Columbine shooters, is 13 years old, so it's 5 years before the actual Columbine shooting. And he's just in the classroom, and his teacher has gotten shot, and she was pregnant. So this 13-year-old kid is looking at his teacher, shot, bleeding out, pregnant. It was like, I should make another flesh wound. What could go wrong? So, with surgical precision, like any 13-year-old boy has, he cuts open his teacher's womb and extracts the baby. Completely fine. It's chillin'. It's having a great time. So obviously nothing goes wrong with this delivery, because why would it? But then the 3 shooters return to the room. So this is where the action really kicks up in chapter 1. So instead of, shooting the person and the baby, instead these mass shooters come in and they grab the baby and hold a knife to her throat dramatically. But then Eric's bud Dylan, the other shooter, comes on in and shoots the other guys, and it's like, whoa, cool. They're dead now, problem solved. So after they've killed the killers, Dylan is looking at this baby, and they're standing over their teacher's corpse, naturally. He's like, who's that baby anyway? Who's the chick? Natural thing to say as your teacher is just dead at your feet, and your friend's holding some strange baby who's probably delivered prematurely because he's just casually cut out of the womb. So now that they've established that it's the teacher's baby, they make some line jokes about it, good timing over the mother's corpse, and they just are like, yeah, I guess Eric's gonna adopt her. And so he just adopts her and names her right there, but no issue whatsoever. That's cool. So a while later, they're at a memorial service for everyone who died in that shooting, which of course includes the teacher, and Eric is thinking, man, I want to get revenge for the woman I loved, because I had a big crush on her ever since I started middle school. So, with his 13-year-old boy logic, he's like, you know what? You know what we should do? Hey, Dylan, you know what we should do? We should shoot up our entire school. That's a great way to get revenge for my dead teacher whom I loved so much. So then, the story cuts to 5 years later, and they're just chilling, and it tries to be so wholesome. They're just being like cool dads to their daughter, and Eric is like the dad, and then Dylan's like the uncle, but they live together. And they raise Jackie, and it's just all good. That's her name, Jackie. So, as you do when you are raising a 5-year-old and you are in high school and you have no opposition, they take her to school with them. And they're doing some kind of project where they have to present, and in a video that they show, someone gets shot. So Jackie, as a 5-year-old, is upset about it and runs out of the room crying. So Eric runs out of the room looking for her, and he spends like 30 seconds looking around at the lockers, and then he can't find her after 30 whole seconds. So he just sits down with his head in his hands. It's like, I've lost my only child. And then she pops out. She's like, hey, Daddy, it's all cool. We're set. So I was like, love you, Daddy. And they're a happy family again. It's okay. So then they just have like a bunch more wholesome family moments as they do. And then they get home and Eric and Dylan are just playing video games, and they're like, man, can't wait to kill some people. So in the next chapter, it is the morning of the Columbine shooting. And I'd like to be clear here that I don't mean any disrespect to the actual victims. I'm just taking the piss out of this fanfiction because It's a lot. So it's the morning of the shooting, and Eric is talking to Jackie and is like, make me a promise. Promise me that you'll be okay. And she's like, you'll be okay, because she's 5. And so they go to school, you know, with the intention of shooting it up, like sane, wholesome family members, and they take Jackie with them. And they're just there with their guns, and they cover her eyes, and they just, like, shoot a couple of students. And they're like, maybe we shouldn't have her here for this. And she's okay at this point. She's like, whatever. I just heard some gunshots, but my eyes were covered, so I don't know what happened. And so they put her in a locker, and they're like, hey, just come out once you don't hear any more shots and find us. Find me and Uncle Dylan, and it'll be all good. And she's like, okay, and just hides out in a locker while listening to gunshots for like several hours. So after she's chilling in that locker for that long, there's some silence, and she's like, okay, it's time to go find Eric and Dylan. So she opens this locker somehow, and she goes and tracks them down. And she sees them, and she hears some count 1, 2, 3, and then she watches them shoot themselves, you know, like a 5-year-old should. So she runs over to Eric and immediately checks his pulse with her basic medical training as a regular 5-year-old. And then she's like, hey, Daddy, are you okay? And he's like, promise me you'll be strong. And she's like, okay, and just kind of leaves, and she goes home to raise herself. She's 5. So next we jump to 7 years later. So now she's a 12-year-old girl, and she's been raising herself. She's just been doing her thing the whole time. And now she's just going to school, as she does, and she sees Dylan there, except older, and as a teacher. And she's like, oh my god, I thought you were dead. And then before too long, she's like, okay, I guess he's alive. That's dope. And then we find out that Eric has been there the whole time, like, last couple of years as a teacher, and she just didn't recognize him. He's like, yeah, he really acts like my dad, so I'll spend every free period with this teacher. So with this plot twist in mind that they both actually survived, Eric's feeling pretty bad for, you know, abandoning a 5-year-old, something like that. And it turns out that he kept tabs on her this whole time, not only by teaching, but also by pretending to be a girl on the internet. You know, like a catfish. Parent of the year. So, because this fanfiction is just full of school shootings, another one happens. And this time, she's in the office with Eric, and she hasn't figured it out yet. So Eric, like, puts her under the table, and during this live shooting, she puts the pieces together, and she's like, oh my god, it's my dad. And so the shooters, of course, come in there, and Eric just stashed his gun under the desk, shoots the shooters. So yeah, after that, these 2 guys are dead. He just shot them, and he's like, hey Jackie, I know you don't like lockdowns. Are you doing okay? And she's like, yeah, Dad, I recognize you. Oh my god. And that's how reunions work. So after this touching moment, they just casually go home. The next chapter is just some kind of parody of Columbine fanfiction on Wattpad, where she pulls it up and then they laugh at it, which is about the least self-aware thing I've ever seen in a fanfiction. And then it just jumps to a year later, and Jackie decides, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm going to explore Columbine. So this little 13-year-old girl goes over there, and she meets Rachel, who was an actual victim of the shooting, and just meets her ghost there. So after meeting the ghost of an actual victim, she comes back home, and at first she's like, yeah, I might have gone to Columbine, sorry. And then Eric apparently gets annoyed, like, why'd you do that? And just this mild bit of unhappiness sends her off the edge, and she's like, why can't you give me space? I wish you died, and runs to her room, and then packs a bag to go run away. So then she hears Eric and Dylan reciting some really weird poem that just doesn't make any sense in the not at all. Not in the context of the story, but not at all either. So she runs off and goes to Columbine, as you do, and there's just some more cryptic poetry that doesn't make any sense, and then she's surrounded by all the ghosts of the Columbine victims for some reason, and she feels at peace. And then the chapter just ends. That's it. So it just moves on from there, and she goes into school, as you do, after some kind of paranormal experience and falling out with your dad. And Eric doesn't actually come in to teach. A substitute comes in, which happens to be his dad, so her grandpa. And she's like, how could you abandon me? You suck! It's like yelling at him in front of the class. And then the entire class clapped. That's what it actually says. So then she goes to Dylan's class and talks to Dylan a bit, and then she's like, oh my god, I was so terrible to Eric. She's thinking about making up with him. Then Eric comes in, she's like, I'm the worst daughter ever, I'm so sorry. And they make up and they're a happy family again. Then the last 3 chapters are really just disjointed and weird, but I'm just gonna go through them individually. First of all, it goes right back to the day of the shooting in 1999, and it just shows them waking up after shooting themselves in the head and being like, okay, we're okay, we should probably go get Jackie now. And then they like look out the window and they see Jackie just kind of doing her thing, and they're like, she'll be okay. This 5-year-old girl will be okay on her own, so it's okay for us to leave her alone. Not to mention there's no mention of police in this entire story, despite 3 school shootings happening. And it goes right off from that and jumps into the next chapter, where it's 2007 again. And there's just a weird little story about Dylan being kind of petty and annoying, and then Eric telling her to go cuss him out, but not too much, and then she goes overboard, and they get in trouble. It's a whole thing, and it's supposed to be comedic and wholesome, and it's just, these are mass murderers, mate. And then the last chapter, she wakes up from a dream, and it turns out that entire last year of her life with Dylan and Eric, her teachers, was just a dream. So you're thinking, okay, plot twist, they actually did die at the beginning. But no, of course not. She goes to school, she sees Eric, and she's like, Eric? He's like, how did you know? So her dream was just spot on the whole time. Then they lived happily ever after. And that's it. That's the fan fiction. I was expecting to find a lot of just basic self-insert weird fan fiction, but this is almost worse because the author tried so hard to be wholesome about it, and it's just, they're mass murderers. They're mass murderers. Anyway, that is it for that video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I'd like to look into more weird true crime fan fictions, because I am 100% positive that there are some self-insert Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy fan fictions. And I'd like to see if I can find an Ed Gein one. Ooh, that'd be a fun time. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye!